Good afternoon. Good to see you, Shiba. I see Arun from time to time. I haven't seen you in a long time. I hope all of you are keeping well. And as you know that we are in the grip of another awful wave of COVID, I think it's important to check if all of you are well and safe, and so are your families. Everything okay in Kerala, Shiba?
Yes, yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I think Maharashtra is definitely reeling, and there is nothing available here except more and more patients of COVID, which becomes very important for us to actually talk about palliative care approach in respiratory symptoms, because I think most of our patients who suffer the COVID 19 symptoms also have a lot of respiratory symptoms. And and besides the curative care, they require a lot of palliation of not just their physical symptoms, but also emotional, psychological, the quarantine, the isolation, the fear, the panic. There's so much going on in this world that it's very important. How many sessions have these nurses had, Shiba?
12, ma'am. 12.
12. And they are from all over the world. I can see Nepal, Kuwait, I think. Where else are they from, Shiba?
Uh, Only Indians.
Only India? No, I think
India and
somebody.
Nepal.
India and Nepal. Okay. So English is comfortable as language of
Yes, yes, ma'am.
communication.
Yes.
Okay, fine. So I would like request all of you to be interactive. If there's anything that is not understood or you want more clarification, please put it on the chat box. Or if you want at the end of the session and the case presentation, we can discuss your queries. But do keep a note of what you want to ask. If there's anything in the middle of the talk also, feel free to interrupt, because the more interactive a session, the more interesting it is and the more educative it is for you and for me. Okay, is it good to start, Shiba?
Yes, ma'am.
So today we will be talking about the palliative approach for respiratory symptoms. So I just want to ask all of you, uh, do you all work in rotation in the different departments of your hospital, or are you all mainly with the interest of working in the palliative care ward? So please put it on the chat box. I just want to know, because I want to just bring to your highlight that this particular PowerPoint presentation was made with the interest for healthcare professionals. But I must say a lot of it is for probably aimed more towards doctors. But I will try and adjust it more towards respiratory, I mean, more towards the nursing point of view, because according to me, I think nurses are the ones who run hospitals. Without nurses, no hospital can run and no patient will be looked after. The amount of time, energy, and dedication that you people put into looking after patients is huge. And I think it must be acknowledged and appreciated. I will try to accommodate the nursing angle of palliation of respiratory symptoms. So, to begin with, this is what we are going to go through today. That is, what is, many people think that palliative care is meant for patients with advanced cancers. Today, we are going to break that thing, that myth, and actually tell you that palliative care is for all, and all are for palliative care, in the sense that all conditions, chronic, in the COVID 19 pandemic, even acute, anything that is life limiting and life changing conditions require palliative care, just like respiratory tract symptoms. So, for example, if you can think of which are the conditions in respiratory medicine or in the chest which we doctors and nurses fully cure, there are very few diseases which we fully cure. If you can start putting in the type chat about a couple of conditions which we fully cure in respiratory medicine, which are the conditions we are trying to control, and which are the conditions which are incurable. So if you try and put it in perspective for every system, respiratory, neurology, gastro, you will realize that up to two-thirds of the conditions are either controllable or incurable. So we healthcare professionals end up curing only one-third of the conditions. The rest require a lot of hand holding. The rest require a lot of holistic approach and supporting of the patient and the caregivers along their journey of suffering. And that is exactly what is palliative care. Today, we will also tell you what is chronic breathlessness syndrome, how to treat that with morphine, and just briefly touch the other respiratory symptoms. So, very important. This is, of course, the slide which belongs to India, but I think it's probably a reflection of what happens in the rest of the Southeast countries also, that the number of people who are affected by non-communicable diseases, which is the lifestyle diseases like COPD, heart, stroke, diabetes, hypertension, is way much more than cancer. Because historically, palliative care was started for the advanced treatment of cancer. It somehow is in the mindset of even doctors that palliative care is meant only for patients dying with cancer. This graph goes to prove that over 40% of Indians are affected by these conditions like COPD, like low respiratory tract infections, diabetes, heart disease, stroke. These are incurable conditions. These can only be controlled, and eventually the patient is going to die of these things. So therefore we realize that we need palliative care approach for all these chronic life limiting conditions. And unfortunately, India today has 18% of the world's population, but almost double of that is the burden of the respiratory illness in India. So there is the world's 32% of the world's chronic respiratory illness is in this country. Also, therefore, you must remember that we are now an aging population. So it is predicted that in the next 30 years, Indians will rise by the 60-year-olds in India will go up by 300%, and the 80-year-olds will go by 700%. So we'll have so many elderly people with a lot of chronic conditions that palliative care will become and should become a norm when you start treating people above the age of 80 or 85. Coming to the commonest symptom of respiratory system, which is breathlessness. So the to little bit highlight to you how important it is to know about breathlessness, almost 75 million people worldwide suffer from breathlessness, and it is not just due to respiratory causes. Respiratory, yes, accounts for a bulk of the reasons. Next comes incurable cancer, and the next comes cardiac illness. So, when you think of breathlessness, yes, you must think of respiratory conditions, but you must also remember that advanced cancers as well as patients with cardiac illness also can be breathless. So, coming to the causes, I'm not sure this is important for you. For you as nurses, I suppose it is important to understand when a person is breathless, correct? But some of the reasons just to remember is, if you broadly think of the lung, think of the airways, so all airway diseases, parenchyma, so interstitial lung disease, if you have a blood clot, so vascular disease, as well as pleural diseases. So broadly, these are the things that can cause breathlessness. The second common scenario is spread of cancer or primary lung cancer, or cancer from the bone, breast, etc., which reach the lung, that also can cause breathlessness. The third thing is any advanced cardiac condition and any advanced neurological condition which affects the muscles of respiration. All these conditions. So, when you have a patient who is breathless, you as a nurse should be able to think of what the cause is. Is it the lung? Is it the heart? Is it something else outside the lung? It's not only the lung. Okay. So, why is this important? Because it also depends on how to treat these patients, right? So, just to make you further understand, I'm sure that you have seen this graph before. Have you all seen this graph before? Yes? You can type it in also, that is not a problem. So basically, why are we yeah, thank you, why are we seeing this graph? The point of importance of seeing this graph is that majority of the patients we see are dying a death which is either graph C or graph D. Only 7% of the world's population die a sudden death. What does that mean? The rest of the 93 do go through a bed bound phase. Whether it is for 2 hours, 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 years is different, but they will not have a sudden death. And what does that mean? That means that the role of palliative care is so very important to give that particular human being comfort, dignity, and respect towards end of life. And that is a huge population of the world. Correct? So today we will discuss the graph C. Because if you realize that non-communicable diseases like, say, airway diseases or smoking related illness or dementia, these conditions are diagnosed, so say around the age of 60 or 70, and the patients die only at the age of maybe 15 years later at 80. What does this show? That these people live a prolonged poor quality life with high symptom burden and slowly worsening dependence on their family members. So, suppose if you concentrate on graph C, this patient was first admitted for, say, probably an infection, then got admitted for breathlessness. So, each time the patient gets admitted is represented by this dip. But when the patient actually goes home, his quality of life is lower and lower and lower. When we doctors treat these patients in hospitals, we focus only on the acute event. We completely don't know what the patient does at home. Is he able to walk on his own? Is he able to eat on his own? Is he able to wash on his own? So it's very important for us to see the patient as a person. That is what palliative care teaches you, to make him more human. I'm sure you all of you have excellent compassionate minds. Have you all looked after your own parents or your own grandparents at home? The approach is different. So it's very important to have that kind of empathy and compassion when you go to work also, because these patients are suffering, these patients lead a poor quality life, and we can't just treat them as COPD, ILD, or we can't just say that this is the patient of probably dementia. We need to treat that patient as a human being, and that is what is this importance of palliative care. And which is why we need to realize these patients lead a prolonged period of time with very high symptom burden. They have worsening quality of life gradually. Therefore, they lose a lot of dignity, respect, and also they become increasingly dependent. And because they are suffering from a chronic, incurable illness, it is very important for us to actually give them a good quality life till death and not unnecessary to give aggressive treatments towards the end of life, because their lung condition, their heart condition, their brain condition is not going to improve. It is incurable. Therefore, it's important for us to ask those individuals how they would like to be treated towards the end. And the reason and importance to tell these things to the nurses is for you on rounds to ask your senior doctors, why are we doing this? It's not necessary to argue, but it is important to learn from the questions. Very often nurses never open their mouths on rounds, and it's very important to understand why you're doing a particular intervention in a patient. So to ask that question also, you need to be aware. So you should get into the habit during rounds to ask people, why are we doing this? What is the purpose of this? Are we prolonging quantity of life or are we focusing on quality of life? So please remember to have healthy discussions on rounds so that even the doctors end up learning from you, because we also don't have this training of comfort and care. We focus so much on cure, we forget the whole ethos of comfort and care. So please remember how to ask your doctors these questions. Coming back to breathlessness, there are different types of breathlessness, which is acute, acute on chronic, and chronic. This is, of course, depending on the duration. Acute breathlessness is something which is probably not in the purview of palliative care, because obviously that patient has been well, he had no complications or no symptoms before, and he will get treated with everything possible. The acute and chronic breathlessness, which we see in patients suffering from chronic lung diseases and the chronic breathlessness, is something that palliative care physicians see. And the common scales that we use are the New York Heart Association, Modified Medical Research Council, and the Borg scale. I'm not so sure how important it is for you to know the details, but you will get this presentation and you will get all this on the web. What is important for you to remember is that the cardiologists use the New York Heart Association assessment tool to tell whether the patient is class 1 or class 4, while the chest physicians use the Modified Medical Research Council or MMRC, and we grade breathlessness from 0 to 4. So cardiologists in their notes will say class 1, class 2, and chest physicians will say grade 0, grade 1, grade 2. Anything beyond grade 3 and 4, or grade 2 and from 2 to 4 in the NYHA is something which will affect the patient emotionally, psychologically, and mentally. So it's important. Why do you, as nurses, should you know how bad the patient is? Because the more breathless the patient, more it hampers his daily life. His life is more limited. Therefore, he is probably more housebound, more bedbound, more dependent, and therefore probably more frustrated, irritated, angry, anxious, and depressed. So, when you see a patient who's withdrawn, who's breathless, these are the support we need from you as nurses to sit and talk to the patient and explore his fears and values and beliefs. Though that is the only reason why you need to be aware of these things. This is again the purview of a doctor of how you will investigate. But again, the highlight of this slide is that you must think of cause of breathlessness beyond the chest. It is not only the chest, so you must include an ECG, and you also must include a 2D echo and an arterial blood gas so that you're sure you're not missing out any other cause for breathlessness. So this is another important fact which I was trying to highlight to you when I was talking to you before. When a person is breathless, what exactly is happening to him? He's obviously not able to do his activities of daily living easily. He struggles to go to the toilet. He probably hardly walks to the dining table to eat with the family. So he decides to stay in his own room, on his own bed, he eats. So slowly and slowly, he becomes socially isolated. He obviously depends more and more on others for simple activities of daily living. And because of this, he's not, also because of the breathlessness, he's not able to even talk on the phone. So slowly, very often, these people die a social death even before a physical one. Therefore, these patients end up being anxious, frustrated, irritable, angry, depressed, and we never think of these things unless we see these things. Whenever we see a patient more breathless, we are giving more oxygen or more nebulizer or more drugs. Instead, you need to explore laterally, ask what else is bothering the patient, and that's when you get to realize what all the patient is thinking about. Which brings us to this beautiful explanation of the breathing, thinking, and functioning model. What does this say? So, suppose imagine you all take a deep breath. Can we all take a deep breath in? If you take a deep breath in and breathe out only half of that. So, and take another breath in and breathe half of that out. If you do that 3, 4 times, you yourself will realize how your patient is feeling when you don't take a full breath. So, when you don't breathe out fully, you're not able to take the next breath fully. And therefore, slowly and steadily, your breathing becomes shallower and shallower. And that is how our patients are 24 by 7, 365 days, year after year. Imagine being like that patient, housebound, bedbound. He's obviously going to get more and more anxious. He's going to get worried. He's going to be scared of death. He's going to, all kinds of negative things will come to his brain and all mind. And also, because of these two experiences, he will start walking and exercising less and less. So when you don't use your muscles, you lose your muscles. So what happens? This patient becomes more and more deconditioned. Therefore, he is caught in this vicious cycle. One, he is very breathless. So he's using his accessory muscles of respiration. Then he becomes more anxious. So he becomes even more breathless. Because of so much breathlessness, he decides not to walk for days on end. And therefore, his muscles also become weaker and weaker. And the muscles also means the muscles of respiration, the muscles of his legs, everything, hands, upper limbs, all of that become much, much weaker. Therefore, he gets stuck in this vicious cycle. This is the cycle that palliative care tries to break. What does palliative care do? Like you all know, it's a multidisciplinary team. And in the West, in US and UK, in fact, they have specialist respiratory nurses who contribute immensely to see to it that these patients are not abandoned. These patients have a ready hotline to reach out to their healthcare professionals. So palliative care physicians and the palliative care team works in breaking this vicious cycle. And how do they do that? First, they look at the breathing. How can the breathing be improved? Obviously, by certain medications, by oxygen, if it is oxygen is less, by morphine, which we will come to. Then they involve the counselor and the psychiatrist to see if the patient is scared about anything, work on his mind, see to it that he doesn't think about if he's depressed, try and address that. Then you get the physiotherapist who give him small graded exercises, who teaches him relaxing breathing techniques. So when all these people act together, that is when, even though we are not able to cure the patient, or even though we are not able to make the patient's symptoms disappear, we make it bearable for the patient. We start at least making the patient enjoy the small pleasures in his life, like going to the toilet on his own, like eating with the family, or maybe going down, even if it's a wheelchair, but able to go down. So, this is the magic of palliative care. And unless you understand how the patient is stuck in this vicious cycle, you'll never know how to help this patient. So, that actually brings us to the definition of chronic breathlessness syndrome, which is basically a condition in which the patient is persistently breathless despite taking all his optimum treatment for his underlying pathophysiology. So it could be bronchodilators, steroids, nebulizers, everything, and still he is breathless. And this breathlessness is affecting his daily life, and it affects him psychosocially, emotionally, and he becomes more and more withdrawn. So the whole term of chronic breathlessness is the patient is already on optimum treatment, continues to be breathless, and that's affecting his daily activities, his psychosocial status, and also it's making it difficult for him to cope. This is very important to recognize. Very often in the ICUs or in the wards, you'll have patients who are admitted with COPD, interstitial lung with acute exacerbations. And the doctors, if you see, including myself, 4 years ago, used to focus only on medications to ease the breathlessness: Derifylin, oxygen, inhalers, nebulizers, steroids, antibiotics. Nobody sat next to the patient and said, "What is bothering you? Are you worried about something? Is there something that you want to share about?" So these are the things which palliative care teaches you. And palliative care teaches you the importance of the non pharmacological interventions. So, very important for you to focus on the non pharmacological importance. For example, in a breathless patient, positioning. Very, very important. How you make him sit, where you make him sit. So, some people say even next to a window, wear loose clothes, blow a fan on his face, you know, teach him some relaxation techniques, breathing techniques. Also, you can do some acupressure. You can also put some music to calm him, because you at least can take care of the anxiety component, and by seeing to it that that decreases the respiratory rate. So please remember, non pharmacological intervention is very, very vital, and that to do that, you really don't need to get a prescription from your doctors. You can start doing this. You can start making your patient feel more and more relaxed. The drug part of it, of course, I have some of it I've already mentioned, which is steroids, bronchodilators, antibiotics, and others. Here, I would like to put a word of caution about oxygen. Very often, when I was training, the nurses used to already put the patient on oxygen before sending the call out. So, therefore, you people need to realize that when you have a person who is breathless, check the oxygen saturation. If the oxygen saturation is above 88, you don't need to panic and start the patient on oxygen. You therefore start explaining to the patient, talk to the patient, give him a nebulizer, give him a little massage, blow the fan, loosen his clothes. You don't need to start oxygen for all breathless patients. Please remember, oxygen is also a drug. Oxygen is also having side effects. Giving people extra oxygen can also be detrimental to life. It releases nascent free radicals, and it actually harms the lung more when given unindicated. So please remember, that, and also in certain lung conditions, giving very high flow oxygen is dangerous because that will lead to carbon dioxide retention, and a person who is conscious will become unconscious. So please remember, you should start oxygen only when below 88. You should start oxygen after you try the non-pharmacological things. Start always low, go slow. Don't start with 8 liters just because the patient is very low oxygen. See the indication for why the patient is admitted, and then start the patient on high flow oxygen. Okay. So we must also then talk about the magic of morphine in chronic breathlessness syndrome. Very often, people think that morphine is only meant for cancer pain. Morphine, when given to a breathless patient, is going to cause respiratory depression and death. Please remember, the doses we use in respiratory conditions for the morphine dose is very, very small, and we titrate it very, very slowly. In fact, we titrate it weekly to see to it that all we do is to make the patient's work of breathing less, the use of accessory muscles of respiration less, and also it cuts the anxiety. When used in low doses, it is safe, it is effective, it does not cause carbon dioxide retention, and it definitely does not cause respiratory depression. So, this is another point that you could use in your rounds to ask your doctors, Doctor, is he a candidate for low dose morphine, especially since he is chronically breathless? We are giving him everything. His lung condition is incurable. So, what are the causes? When will you start morphine? So sometimes, doctors also don't like to be questioned. Very often, doctors feel very intimidated when somebody is asking them a more intelligent question. So the way to frame that is also different. That is a part of your communication skill, saying, I have read about this. Do you think it's useful? Or what do you think is the role of morphine in such a patient? The point what I'm trying to make is you people must have active, engaging, healthy discussion rounds. Unless you do that, your doctor colleagues are also not going to learn, and you also will not spread the ethos and principles of palliative care. So, this is the way we manage chronic breathlessness syndrome with morphine when we start patients who are opioid naive. And how do we start patients? This is unfortunately in the subcontinent, nurses do not have the rights to prescribe. Am I right, Sheba?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So in the West, again, nurses are given the rights, and actually, when they do their rounds for home visits, they actually can give prescriptions of morphine. We haven't evolved that yet. We are still an immature society, but we can combine benzodiazepines if we feel the patient is anxious and breathless. And if the patient is in panic, we also combine morphine along with a, a benzodiazepine like midazolam or lorazepam. Okay. So please remember, whenever you have a breathless patient, you must think of the non-pharmacological, the position, clothes, fan, breathing techniques, relaxation techniques, massage, oxygen, and then you can think about morphine if you know the diagnosis is chronic breathlessness syndrome. Okay. Any questions? Any doubts, or am I going too fast? All okay, Shiba?
Yes, ma'am. You can go.
Okay, I have just put up this slide again to bring out, highlight to you the opioid phobia that people have. People feel that opioids are meant only when they're dying. People feel that it's to be given for pain, and people feel that it is, I don't have cancer, why am I getting morphine? So please remember, there are other uses of morphine. When used safely, it is very, very effective in breathlessness. It actually improves the quality of life of patients. And I have patients who live for 6 to 9 months also on low dose morphine and titrated to their needs. So anywhere between say 5 milligrams to 25 milligrams of morphine, and they at least are able to enjoy the small pleasures of life. It's safe in the doses we give for breathlessness. It does not cause side effects of respiratory medicine, depression, or increased carbon dioxide. And there are many references in case you want to convince your doctors whom you are taking rounds with. Okay. So next point, which is important, is terminal breathlessness. I'm sure many of you look after patients who are actively dying. At this case, at this situation, the comfort, the dignity, and the respect of the human being is of paramount importance. Because I'm sure you have heard this sentence also, when Dame Cicely Saunders, the founder of the modern palliative care movement, she says that the manner in which a loved one passes away is etched in the memories of those who live on. So the caregivers, the ones who are looking after the patient, will always remember how this patient has died. So it is our onus as doctors, as nurses, as healthcare professionals to see to it that we give this patient a as less suffering end as possible. And this also helps us, because if a patient is suffering, like in Hindi we say tadap tadap ke marna, that is, you also come home very depressed, you also come back from the hospital saying, this patient suffered so much. So we have a lot in our bag to keep these patients comfortable. The problem is we are not taught about this in our trainings. We are not taught to think about dying in our training, because we feel we are doctors, we are nurses, we only save lives. But when conditions become incurable, we should shift our focus from cure to comfort and care. Somewhere along the whole way, we have forgotten to be compassionate human beings. We only think of cure, 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 and then we say, now we cannot do anything. While there's so much we can do to comfort a patient. And one such thing is terminal breathlessness. And for terminal breathlessness, we use a combination of morphine and midazolam given as a syringe pump or a syringe driver over 24 hours as a subcutaneous route. I don't need to tell you people about subcutaneous route. You people have taught me. So subcutaneous route is commonly used in palliative care, and a combination of these two drugs given over 24 hours really benefits the patient, because the patient can then transition in comfort, in sleep. So the intent is to keep the patient comfortable. You will need to communicate very well with the patient's family, document it. The injection will cause the patient to be a little more sedated. The idea is that the patient is not aware of his symptoms and therefore not in distress. The intent is to comfort the patient. The intent is not to kill the patient, because the doses we give is only to comfort the patient. Therefore, the patient might be sedated, and therefore the patient will transition from life to death much more comfortably without behaving like a fish out of water. And that's exactly what how we don't want our patients to be. So that is terminal breathlessness. In some parts of the world, it's also called as palliative sedation. So whatever I told you before is what is it is here, that the intent is to comfort the patient. Communication is vital, the documentation is vital, and you must remember that this is mainly done to keep the patient comfortable. Okay, so we use morphine and midazolam. The next important thing, and I've seen many nurses do the suction as instructed by the doctors. Now, just imagine for a patient who is probably awake or unconscious, the amount of trauma we cause by putting that rubber catheter and into the posterior pharyngeal wall. So many patients have ulcers, and it is such a horrible sight. So you must remember that when you have so much secretions coming out and you're not able to manage it, there are medications which you can use to decrease the secretions instead of shoving that tube under the in the throat and suctioning the patient. Very often you see that patients who get discharged after a stroke or after a probably an oropharyngeal cancer, etc., very often they will have a suction machine behind them. Imagine how traumatic and painful it is for the patient. The poor patient is not able to talk, and we are here throwing that horrible tube into the back of the throat. So decreasing the secretions is a great way, and we do it with hyoscine or glycopyrrolate. These is what we use it for. And the simple doses are also mentioned. If you I'm sure you will have articles, and I can send you references about this. But hyoscine and glycopyrrolate can be used first on a need based and then regularly, because we don't want to over dry the patient also. Over drying also can become very uncomfortable. Use these medications. So whenever again you have doctors who are saying suction, do the suction, you can say, I have heard about these two drugs. What is your experience? Can we read about it? Can we present to you some details about reducing secretions in such patients and not doing suction for these patients? Okay. We come to the second most important. Please remind me of the time, Shiba. Second most important symptom, which is cough, which is actually a protective mechanism for the lower respiratory tract. But when it becomes persistent, when it disturbs sleep, and when it can become very bothersome. And again, you must remember that cough is also not just respiratory. It could be cardiac, it could be ENT, it could be gastric reflux, it could be because of the treatment, drugs, radiation, and some of them can also be for attention seeking, especially in children. It could be psychogenic cough, where they keep coughing to get attention. So again, remember there are various drugs available for cough. Again, you should always start with common things are common and non-pharmacological. So you try and tell the patient to do steam, hot water gargles. You can tell the patient to do lozenges. You can tell the patient to do ginger, honey. All those things can be done. And if it's still very, then a proper, of course, a history and evaluation. But if the cough, if you've ruled out all the other causes and the cough is just because of the underlying lung condition, then opioids, codeine work very well, and also gabapentin. So please remember that when you think of all the medications I said, you must obviously continue all the basic medications that the patient is on, and also think about codeine, syrups, low dose morphine, like in breathlessness, and also please remember that gabapentin in the dose of 300 to 600 milligrams has worked very well for intractable cough. And gabapentin, if you remember, is an anti-epileptic also used for neuropathic pain. So you can try these things, but please remember common things are common. And for these specialist drugs, it's better to involve a palliative care team. The, just quickly running through the others. One is pleural effusion, which is very important for you to, which is very important presentation, especially in cancers. What you must remember that the management of pleural effusion differs if the patient is going to die within 4 weeks or if the patient is going to live longer. If the patient is going to live longer, then you must put an indwelling catheter and see to it that the patient's comfort is looked at and that he doesn't have to keep coming to the hospital to drain the fluid. He can drain it at home. But suppose the patient is not going to live that long, then you just tap it once and see to that the patient is comfortable. If patients are going to live longer, then you can do a procedure called as pleurodesis. You basically obviate that particular space, which is the pleural space. So that can be done, but again, it is a procedure that has to be done with the intercostal drain. You completely tap the fluid, and then you put the talc, and the talc, sterile talc, causes intense inflammation in the thoracic cavity, and therefore the visceral pleura and the parietal pleura get stuck, and there is no potential space for fluid to accumulate. So that is important. I don't think we should do, again, for hemoptysis, the role of nurses is probably more of support, dark towels to see to it that the patient is in a proper position, not aspirate the blood he is throwing out, because a commonly seen cause of death with hemoptysis is not just blood loss, but also aspiration of the blood and killing the patient, drowning in his own blood. So that is important. These are the sophisticated procedures available. And the last, of course, is hiccups, which again you see commonly, could be due to acid reflux. Simple things, again, non pharmacological things help, which is basically drinking water, which is holding your breath, distracting the patient, trying to scare the patient so that the diaphragmatic contractions stop. But otherwise, antacids, PPI, putting in a Riles tube and neutralizing the acid are other medications that we use. But it is again something that you probably can offer more support and what do you say, be there for the patient to encourage him and to see to that his symptoms don't make him lose confidence and he continues to remain, uh, what do you say, with the belief that yes, he is in good hands. And I think that is one thing that nurses are able to do because of the amount of time you all spend with the patient, the emotional rapport that you all have with the patient. I think patients are much more comfortable talking to you than asking doctors questions. So I think nurses play such an important role in our healthcare that we really should acknowledge that, and we really need to appreciate the hard work that you people do with our patients. So thank you, and over to Sheba.
Thank you, ma'am, for the wonderful presentation. So anybody like to ask any questions, please ask. Either you can unmute yourself and talk, or you can send your questions through chat.
Either I have been very clear or I have confused them all.
It was clear, ma'am.
Who somebody's doing the case presentation, right?
Yes, ma'am. Anybody? Any questions? Okay. Can we move on to the case presentation, ma'am?
Sure, sure.
So, Mr. Harishankar will be presenting the patient story today. Mr. Harishankar, are you there?
Yeah, ma'am.
Oh, okay. Over to you.
Hello.
Yes, go on. We can hear you.
A very good afternoon, ma'am. A very good afternoon to all.
Yes.
Today I am presenting a small case I observed in my clinical settings.
Okay.
So my case is, my patient details is, so age group is 59 years, gender female, diagnosis as metastatic squamous cell carcinoma. They are presenting complaints, cough with the mucoid sputum for the past 2 months, swelling over the right side of the neck around 2 months, and also appetite is decreased, and nausea and vomiting, so constipation also there. As by subjective data by their attendants, so depression also, hiccups, and extreme weakness and tiredness, restlessness, shortness of breath. These are all the complaints of present situation of my client. And then this image clearly indicates one lung is completely collapsed while conducting.
So, may I interrupt you? When
Yeah,
you
ma'am,
see this X-ray, what is it that you can see? You said one lung is completely wiped out.
Yeah,
What
ma'am.
else is of significance in this? I know it is not necessary for nurses to read X-rays, but it is interesting to see what is the thing that strikes you when you see this X-ray.
Yeah, ma'am. Here, right now, this is COVID situation, ma'am. So many people they write HRCT for observing any correct score like that. So that's why I paste image here. Why? Because this one also completed collapse lung, ma'am. So
So
in
yes,
this,
so with the the left side of the lung is completely opaque.
yeah, ma'am.
The trachea is also shifted to the same side.
Yes, ma'am.
The diaphragm and the stomach has also gone up.
Yeah, pleural effusion also there, ma'am.
That is CP angle blunting. See, when you have a pleural effusion, usually the lung is pushed to the opposite side.
Yes, ma'am.
When the lung is pulled to the same side, it is obviously a collapse with the pleural effusion.
Okay, ma'am.
Understood? So
Yeah,
otherwise,
yeah,
if
ma'am.
something is filling into the lung, then
Okay.
everything will be pushed to the opposite side.
Okay, ma'am.
This is eating the lung. So it's pulled to one side. You understand? Which means that the left lung is not taking part in respiration at all.
Okay, ma'am.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Then history of illness. A 59-year-old gentleman presented with the complaints of cough with mucoid sputum for the past 2 months. It is associated with scanty hematopoiesis in the form of blood, tinged sputum, and no diurnal or seasonal variation. He also noticed a swelling over the right side of the neck, 2 months, slowly increasing in size, are not associated with any skin changes or any discharges. And his appetite is decreased and has lost over 5 kgs of weight over a period of 6 months. He is passing stools once in 3 to 4 days, and his bladder habits are regular. For these complaints, she was evaluated and found to have a metastatic squamous cell carcinoma of lung. And furtherly, he came to Srikar for their further management. Then examination, so temperature 36.8 degrees centigrade, pulse rate 110 beats per minute, respiration 28 breaths per minute, and blood pressure also 140/90 mm of Hg. Oxygen saturation 95% in room air. So ECOG score means it 1. So pain score also 8/10 by numerical rating scale. And some of the treatment and significant investigations. Serum creatinine value is 0.8 mg per dl. So RBS 89 mg per dl. Hemoglobin 10 mg per dl. And biopsy and IHC markers also there. So the biopsy and IHC markers, so P40 is positive, and TTF1 also negative, and CK 5/6 also positive. So these are all the results. Then psychological aspects. He wants to know what is happening to him. So he has a single daughter. He was aware of his condition along with his family. He feels depressed and anxious about his disease condition. Sometimes I want to look after by people who know my disease. My family is full of stress, like their wife that is need any support. He tell like sometimes I might die. How will my wife cope? So these are all the psychological aspects. Then medications. So for pain management, tablet morphine sulfate 50 mg every 4th hourly, and breakthrough doses also available. And for constipation, so Dalcolex 5 mg. Sorry, here dose didn't mention. So Dalcolex 5 mg, 2 tablets every at bedtime, along with 30 ml of ceftriaxone, and tablet pantoprazole 40 mg before breakfast. So the main concern of the mortality is treatment, prognosis of disease, lack of financial support, and telling about always their family. Then summary. A 59-year-old man with CA lung on lateral diagnosis as metastatic squamous cell carcinoma, live with one daughter and his wife, while using above medications to reduce their pain and other factors. Then discussing points, as discussed by today class based along with my patient story. So he should have been made aware of his current condition and prognosis, and counseling his and his family regarding his condition, providing financial support to the family for their daughter's education especially. Is there any remedies, it means non-pharmacological methods to reduce their frequent hiccups? If oral bleeding is started suddenly, what would happen in their home? So these are all the discussing points.
So you tell me, what are the, how will you, if you can put it back on this? Yeah. So what is this thing about hiding the current situation from the patient called? There's a terminology for that.
That is collusion, ma'am.
Collusion. So what is exactly collusion?
Actually, the disease condition, they know everything, ma'am. Like patient is known what is the disease, what is the prognosis, everything
What is
they know.
collusion? What does collusion mean?
Ma'am?
What does collusion mean? Explain
Collusion,
it. Explain collusion.
It is hide or it is like that or to maintain secrets.
Yeah, so basically patient is, so collusion could be between patient and family. Family is telling patient, family is telling the doctor, don't tell the patient.
Yes, ma'am.
Sometimes patient is telling the doctor, don't tell the family.
Yeah, ma'am.
Correct? So collusion could be of many types. It's basically hiding things from each other. But in your experience, who should know about the condition? Patient, family, patient and family, only family.
Majority times, as my observation,
Not
patient
your
family,
observation. I'm saying ideally, what should it be? In your
patient patient attendance, ma'am.
patient family should know the condition.
Yeah, ma'am. Patient family, they know the condition, but
Not
they
like
get.
that. I'm asking you, ideal situation in our country, who should know about the illness? Is it patient? Is it family? Is it patient and family?
Both, ma'am. Patient and family.
No, it is actually the patient should know. Whether family knows, we are saying it because we have a social support structure.
Okay,
What
ma'am.
is medical ethics? Autonomy. Autonomy is the first pillar of medical ethics, which means it is my body, my right to know. So even
Okay.
doctors and nurses should see to it that if the family is present, it's okay. But if patient should be told and patient's permission should be asked if the family needs to be known. You
Okay, ma'am.
understand? It's very
Yes, ma'am.
important. So we must, as a right of the patient, tell him his condition. And for that, we, you and me, need to learn how to talk, to tell the patient how grave his situation is. Have you ever told a patient how horrible his disease is?
Yes, ma'am.
You have. You know how difficult that can be, na?
No, ma'am. They know each and everything.
No, I'm
Because
saying
they,
suppose
ma'am.
you have to tell a patient in the ward when his report has just come. The doctor is breaking the bad news to the patient. It is very difficult for the patient, na?
Yes, ma'am. Very
It is
difficult, ma'am.
difficult for the doctor also. That's why doctors don't do a good job about it. So you have to train. What I'm trying to tell you is communication is very, very important. How to
Yes, ma'am.
tell the person that this is such a horrible disease, that you have this disease, that it is not a very good prognosis, but at the end of it, you have to say that we are there to support you. You appreciate
Yeah,
it.
ma'am.
So communication is important, and it is the right of the patient to know about his illness. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Second thing is, what else can you do? See all the other points that you have listed: counseling, financial support. So who all will you involve in the care of this patient?
Their family members, especially their wife and daughter.
Yeah, but whom will you introduce the wife and daughter to? Who
They,
counsels patients and families?
m- majority time at the first visit, OPD clinical visits, the doctor also counseled, ma'am. Once the
Correct.
consultation is
The doctor
completed,
counsels, but the doctor is not a trained professional.
yeah, yes, ma'am, yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So who is the one?
So one medical social worker is there, ma'am.
Exactly.
So yeah,
Medical
ma'am.
social workers help with counseling or with finances?
Both, ma'am. Actually, the medical social worker first they counsel to the family members,
Ah,
the patient also, ma'am. Once it is completed, there is any lack of financial support, each and everything she
correct.
identified, ma'am. He
Correct.
identified. That
Correct.
time,
So even
he or she,
counselors and psychologists, that's why this whole beauty of palliative care team, doctors, nurses, counselors, social workers, physiotherapists, everybody working to address different problems and needs of the patient. Correct?
yes, ma'am, yes, ma'am.
So social worker is important, counselor is important. Then you have asked for pharmacological for hiccups. What have we learned from the lecture?
Ma'am,
What have we learned from the lecture for hiccups?
generally, we explain sometimes while suddenly hiccups will come, take a little bit of sugar and cold water like that, ma'am.
Also, you can teach them breathing exercises. Hold your breath. That helps in stopping the hiccups, and also antacids.
Yes, ma'am.
The acidity can worsen the hiccups, right?
Okay.
Correct. And what advice will you give if bleeding starts at home? What will you tell
Actually,
them?
first of all, we prepare one anticipatory bleeding kit, ma'am.
Yes.
Why? Because in that kit, it contains of one green cloth and
Correct.
one injection of tranexamic acid injection, and
Correct.
some two or three pairs of surgical or examination gloves, and one 10 cc syringes. So one, two or three gauze pads, everything we packed one cover and provided to patients, ma'am. Why? Because
Mm.
suddenly explained each and everything to their attendants. In
Mm.
case in their home suddenly there may be a chance to get any started bleeding, that time they do what we here we demonstrate same like this they written demonstrate in their home like that current there are that situations, ma'am.
Yes, yes, correct. Another slide before that, uh, before this slide, there was another slide which could we can also discuss on that. No, another one, I think. No. Where did I see? Yeah, this. How will you address this?
So we would like we can ask from the participants also, ma'am.
Yeah, yeah. Others only.
Yeah.
Everybody else. Not just him. Anybody who
Others,
wants to answer or
please.
chat or
Yeah, please answer it.
take one question. He wants to know what is happening to him, single daughter. So what is going on here? Anybody wants to address these questions?
Anybody?
Hello. Yeah,
Yes.
man, the patient is not knowing it actually, the situation.
Hmm.
That is why he is more worried about that. Well, he is not able to.
How can we solve it?
I think we must frankly, we should take time and, gradually we should introduce his condition about his condition.
Correct. So what protocol will you use, ma'am? What is the protocol we commonly use in palliative care to break the bad news? Yeah. What is that protocol called?
By following spike strategy, ma'am.
Excellent. So that is Spike's protocol.
Yeah.
I'm sure you all will heard. You all already heard. So it's very simple. If you think about this, then you will not mess up the way you're telling this. Very, very important to break bad news gently, unhurriedly, and sensitively. He should be given the truth, but it should not sound like it's being thrusted upon him. He should be given told the truth and also offered the support. Okay. What are his issues you think anybody else wants to answer, or what about single daughter? What all is going on in his mind? What else is he worried about? His wife, his daughter, will he be able to cope? What will you answer to a person who says, will I die? Well, how will you answer this question? He may be worried about her education, marriage. Yes, correct, very good. But suppose a patient asks you, am I going to die? Will I die? What are you going to, how are you going to answer that question? Which is the best way to answer that question? Anybody? Harishankar, you want to try? Because how would you say if a patient is saying, am I going to die? What would you tell?
First of all, we explained prognosis and
Yes.
related to their disease condition, ma'am, along
Yes.
with their family also.
Correct.
Then, then next one is we explain the adverse effects and
Mhm.
problems each and everything to
You
patient.
have
Why? Because
explained, but imagine you are being told that you have cancer, that it is a bad cancer, that we are trying the treatment, but we are not sure it is working. You have told them so much information. You think the patient will be in a state of mind to listen to all your understand everything. You have told him 10 things. He would have heard 8. He would have understood 5, and he will be still worrying about 2. And do you think he'll understand it?
yes, ma'am.
You think he will understand it? Or he will be panicking big time?
No, ma'am. This is that time we didn't panic, ma'am. Why? Because we create some panic atmosphere. The patient and their attendants also they are also undercomes panic, ma'am.
No, 100%.
First,
Anybody who's told that they have horrible cancer
yeah,
will not say, okay, now tell me what else will happen to me. They will be shattered, no? They will be
yeah, ma'am.
devastated. So you also need to think about whether you have to tell everything in that one session. Correct?
Yes, yes, ma'am.
Also, next time when you go to meet him, go with a counselor because he might cry, he might get angry. So many things can happen. Thirdly, when anybody says this, I am going to die, the best way to approach is why. Use two things, why and what. What is making you say this? Why are you feeling like this? What is it in your mind? And explore the worries instead of addressing death. It's too early to start talking about it if it is your first meeting. So explore, get him to chat, form your rapport. We are very in a hurry to
Yeah.
complete the agenda. The agenda is not to tell him everything and walk away. Na? The agenda is to break to him the news and the truth in the pace that he is ready to take it. Not our business to finish it off telling and running away from the scene. Every patient, therefore, is different. Every patient's capacity is different. Understanding is different. Grasping is different. Correct? We are all not the same. So
Yes,
assess the situation. If somebody is blurting out and say, am I going to die? Am I going to die? How will you answer that question? The best way is you don't know this person from childhood. So best way is to say, I can see that you're getting stressed. Why are you asking these questions? What is bothering you? How can I help you? Can we sit with a counselor? You understand? And the idea is not to answer the question. The idea is to answer the question at an appropriate time and offer the patient the correct support.
yes,
That
ma'am.
is what palliative care does. It's not tick question, answer, question, answer.
Yes, ma'am. First of all, we reduce their uncertainty, ma'am. What
Correct.
he thinking.
Correct. So
Then
it's,
we manage their symptomatic problems. Definitely,
yes.
he or she may be changed.
Yes. So the important is not to tell him, it's not, I've told him everything. But what is happening to him is also our concern. You can't send a distressed human being outside. He will go and kill himself. Correct?
Yes,
So
ma'am.
when somebody asks such desperate questions, sit him down. What is happening? Why are you saying this? How can I help you? Can we speak to your wife? Can we bring your daughter? Can we tell them all? Can I get a counselor? That is how you build a rapport with a patient. Okay?
Yes, ma'am.
So a lot of what we do, what probably we are not trained in our training is the lateral thinking. We only think of physical symptoms. A human being is made up of so many other elements. That is what we need to focus on, and that's what palliative care teaches you is person-centered care, not patient. Patient of lung cancer, patient of cirrhosis, patient of heart attack. That is not the way we should. We should say Mrs. So and so or Mr. So and so who has this and also has all these other elements, because the minute we are a part of a society. It is not just I, me, myself, right? There is family, there is friends, there's colleagues. Our health affects so many people, so therefore we have to have an approach which is multidisciplinary.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank
I,
you.
and,
Anything else? Sorry, Harishankar.
ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am. So we
Yeah,
are
thank
also
you.
focusing same thing, ma'am. In end of life care,
Yeah.
majorly we discuss some issues, ma'am, like their patient concerns and
Yeah.
their family concerns,
Yeah.
understanding of of their illness and prognosis, and prefer some of the time to their cultural and religious beliefs,
Mm.
and focusing of the patient supportive care,
Yes.
and any other that time when the patient is alive means there may be chance to get they might be died. So that time is there any benefits like
Mm.
incoming benefits before we cover all the like there any other schemes, they provided some money, that thing also provided, and some of the give provided some of the I don't know exactly physical deterioration, ma'am, like that.
Yes. Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
So,
These are
very
all.
often patients are also not ready to think. Suppose they're feeling well now, they're not ready to think of how it will be. You, as a healthcare professional, have seen more patients like this. So, you're able to tell that this might happen. But very often, patients are not prepared to listen to the fact that things can get worse.
Yes,
Human
ma'am.
beings are in that frame ki, how, no, but if I don't think about it, it will not happen. But that is what the way you speak and your body language, your eye contact, all those things make a difference. And then the patient is okay to listen to you, even if you're trying to give them bad news.
Okay, ma'am.
Okay, that is very important. I think communication is something which is most important, and not just at work. It is with
Yes, ma'am.
colleagues, it is at home, it is with staff, it is with maids, it's everybody. Your communication is the most important thing that will get you in life.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Sure, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Well done. Over to you, Shiba.
Okay, ma'am. Any more questions? So as madam said, if we treat this type of patients, always explore their insight about the prognosis and diagnosis. So we have to explore their insight first, and based on their insight, you have to break the bad news. So as madam said, communication is very important here. And if the patient is having breathlessness, usually patient as well as the family members could anxious. So what is happening to me? So that is very that the nurses most of the time the nurses will be with the patient. So if possible, you have to be with the patient and just convey that message. We are here to help you. That we have to give a compassionate care with to the patient and the family. So that time they that it could be reduced the anxiety level. If you are there, so that anxiety level will be reduced. And always focus on, you can include non-pharmacological management, and then can go with the pharmacological management. So thank you, ma'am, for the excellent
Thank you.
presentation.
Thank you, Shiba. Always good to see you.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Me too,
Somebody's
ma'am.
asked a question: spirometry exercise in cancer lung patient.
Oh.
Parvati, so it all depends on whether the patient also has an underlying airway disease, because usually lung cancer patients are usually smokers, not necessarily. And if they are smokers and they have been investigated for an underlying airway disease, then spirometry will help. But if the cancer has a lot of pain, then expecting them to do poo is going to make the pain worse. So it really has to be individually assessed. It's not a blanket solution for all. Okay.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay. Take care. Stay safe. I
Okay.
believe even Nepal is having some rising numbers of COVID now. So please take care. And Arun has sent you the feedback form.
Thank you, Harishankar, for that
Presentation.
presentation. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you for the
you.
interactions and all. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you so
Bye.
much, ma'am. Bye, ma'am.
Thank you.
Is that Raji at the back? No.
No. No,
Okay.
ma'am.
I have not.
She is sitting.
Okay. Bye.
Oh, thank you. Bye. Thank you.